I think there are things in this world worth dying for. I genuinely think there are things that, and we know there are people who risk their lives and their health all the time around the world for things. I'm not entirely sure that a pretty long strip of concrete or tarmac in the west of London is something that I would be willing to put my health or my life at risk for. Why do you think it is?
Well, it's a fair question, Julia. I mean, it's obviously far more than just a strip of concrete in West London. There are obviously the immediate impacts of displacing thousands of people from their homes, and the local air and noise quality impacts, which will be quite severe. But it's actually more about the fact that the thing no one else is talking about in this debate is climate breakdown, and the fact that we are running headlong into essentially, an existential threat to Britain, to humanity across the globe.
And that's all from the third runway.
I mean,
that's a very powerful third runway.
It is. Aviation is the fastest growing source of carbon emissions, and a third runway at Heathrow is going to make Heathrow a source of emissions as large as Portugal. I mean, Heathrow is the biggest, most polluting infrastructure unit in the UK. Mm-hmm. We can't really underestimate that, and we are continuing to underestimate climate breakdown in spite of it killing hundreds of thousands of people every year. MPs
climate breakdown kills how many people every year?
More than 300,000 people every year, and that's numbers from 2009.
How does it do that?
Later. Through intensified hurricanes and natural disasters.
There's even the IPCC accepts that there is no evidence of natural disasters being any greater in volume or in intensity in recent years. You realise that most other countries across Western Europe have far more runways, far more airports. They're expanding. We know everyone always talks about China. They've built, I think, 20 full airports. In fact, probably built 20 cities in the time we've been arguing over a third runway at Heathrow. Do you really think that it's going to make any difference to the world, to the climate, if that's your concern, that a third runway is built in West London?
Absolutely.
I think it's extremely important that the President of the United States comes to Britain and steps foot on the land and shows his support for the country. No matter what happens to Brexit, no matter what happens to anything, the relationship between the U.S. and this country are stronger than ever.
How important is it to him? Because we know that he's very keen to meet the Queen. He's a big fan of the Queen. He knows his mother's always been a big royalist. Would he be coming if tea with the Queen wasn't an option?
No, his schedule's still a little bit up in the air, but I think a visit to the Queen is very important to the President, as it would be for anybody, because she's the head of state. So it's a normal protocol, and I know he's looking forward to it, and I know he's looking forward to coming here.
So there's a lot of talk of protests being held against him when he arrives, and indeed the planned trip a number of times has been put off and even cancelled. It looked like at one point because of the prospect of major protests, particularly in London. Will the protests have any effect on Donald Trump? What will he make of them?
I don't think so, and I don't think the aspect of a protest was ever a relevant factor in terms of coming or not coming. But yeah, I mean, that's all part of it. He's used to contrary opinions of one thing or another, and he's comfortable in where he wants to take the country and the road he's leading everybody, including the worldwide.
You're saying he won't be remotely bothered by lots of people chanting against him on the streets?
I don't think there will be a lot of people chanting, I would suspect. But I think he's used to people disagreeing with him, and he's very comfortable presenting his own point of view and presenting it in front of large audiences, as you've seen, just recently in Nevada.
What's your message as his representative in the UK to those protesters, those planning to protest against the American president visiting?
I think together, this country and the U.S. are much, much stronger and much more prosperous when we're doing things together, as we've done for 100 years and more.
Steve Pound, Virendra Sharma, Seema Malhotra, absolutely wrapped around the airport. They all voted for Heathrow.
It's the jobs, yeah.
Why? Because so many of their constituents have well-paid, unionised jobs at Heathrow. And also they recognise this is maintaining opportunities for the youngsters in those communities as well. They were actually voting both for their constituents and indeed for the national interest. Interestingly enough, when I was the Transport Minister and writing the 2003 Aviation White Paper, What we found was many of those constituencies that had the highest level of supposed opposition also had the highest propensity to fly out of Heathrow.
There is some irony, is there not, Chris Williamson, in the Boris Johnson flying out to Afghanistan, not from Heathrow, interestingly, but flying out to Afghanistan to avoid a vote about expanding an airport.
Well, it was a certain irony there with Boris, but you can't really take very much of what Boris says seriously on any issue, frankly. But I disagree with John. I don't think this is in the national interest at all. And I'm sick to death of huge infrastructure investment projects going into the southeast. I mean, there is another country now outside of London. And, you know, we don't just need one hub airport. I mean, what about East Midlands Airport just up the road from me? What about Gatwick? What about Stansted, which would have been, I think, more suitable sites if we're going to have another one in London? What about Birmingham? What about Manchester?
But isn't the whole point of a hub airport, as we do need it to be, is one major airport? And the point is that people don't want to fly into East Midlands Airport. They want to fly into London.
Well, I'm not actually sure that necessarily everybody wants to go to London to fly off to other destinations. But other cities around the world, major cities around the world, have several hub airports, in their locality. And I just think, Heathrow is completely unsuitable. The cost of it is prohibitive. We're going to lead to considerably more congestion.
All of the signs point to the reality that actually, we're going to end up in a very high alignment Brexit, which means we're going to be following new rules.
But wasn't one of the reasons why people voted leave, from the polling that's been done about why people what appealed to them, was this idea that we were in a union that is all very beneficial for big business. I've met lots of people in the city over the years since we voted, who particularly entrepreneurs, people who actually say, do you know what, I can't even admit this publicly. You're not allowed to, but this is a system that benefits multinationals, but it doesn't benefit anyone else. It's a bit of a closed shop. It's it's benefits those who are already in effectively very successful businesses. But of course they want it not to change. But why should businesses be able to dictate the outcome of a democratic vote?
Because
I think is what a lot of leaders would say.
Because businesses are the major employers, Julia.
No, these businesses aren't actually. The vast majority of business people employed in this country aren't employed by these companies.
Yeah, but the small businesses in this country, if you're running a coffee shop or you're running a small business, the pound that people have in their pocket is what people spend in your business. Now, the government's own figures show that the economy is, the revenue is going to be 15 billion down already, right? While they're promising 20 billion more for the NHS. So if the economy is going to be shrinking, and there isn't really a serious economist out there that says the economy isn't going to be shrunk as a result of a hard Brexit, that's less money for businesses to spend. Big business. I mean, I think that if you look at the real polling, Sir John Curtis is very good on this.
Yes.
The one thing people actually want from a political perspective is a dividend on migration control. If you actually really dive into the data, what people really want is to say that we've taken control of our borders. Now, that will hit business because they rely on cheap internationalised labour markets. And actually, there is a good argument saying that we need to do more to train our own labour force. But I think, that's where May will seek to actually deliver something visible on Brexit. It'll be something on migration.
If you go to Europe, not a single business dares talk to their government about what will happen if the European Union decides they don't want to have a free trade deal with the United Kingdom. And so this is a deeply unbalanced process. We have businesses trying to lecture the UK government, but when you go over into Europe, Mrs. Merkel accused, as I understand it, one of the business leaders of being a traitor for saying that they wanted to have some kind of deal with the UK. For them, the ideology of the European Union trumps everything else. And this is where the big problem exists. I would love businesses to go in Europe and start talking direct to their governments, but they don't do it. It's only in the UK we get this. The second thing, which is important, which Peter Foster failed to point out, was that only 8% of all of our businesses actually export to the European Union. And that means that all of the rules and regulations, which are incredibly complex and costly, bear down on almost every other business in the UK, making them far less competitive and putting them in great cost difficulty. And they are the businesses, by the way, that provide the vast, vast majority of the jobs in the UK. So there are huge dividends about this. No one is talking about wanting to necessarily leave without a deal, but the ball is in the European Union's court about that. They have so far showed absolutely no inclination to want to have a deal. And by the way, this will also damage them. So it's not a one-way process.
But this is it. If it is the case that the EU are willing for political ideology and to prevent anyone else thinking this might be a good idea to leave the EU, want to punish us, want to do that, then there will be a financial cost. In which case, were Leave voters lied to? And is Project Fear Mark 2 actually the real, the reality, rather than just a bit of fear mongering?
No, because the whole point about leaving is that you have the flexibility then to ensure that you seek newer markets. So the key element here is that the European Union is a big export market for us, but there are plenty of other export markets as well. And bear in mind, our fastest growing export market is the United States.
I'd love to do stand-up again. I mean, sort of family stuff got in the way. I sort of became a novelist, really, mainly because I had young kids and I wanted to be a part of that. And when you're on the road as a comedian, you really are, you're on the road. Yes, I'd love to go back, although I wonder how easy it would be. I made a lot of, I wasn't a political commentator, but I was a comedian who did make a lot of social and political jokes because it was live TV and I was taking the newspapers and riffing on them. These days, it's almost as if the world is self-satirizing. I mean, it's a very confusing world when you have the things that, particularly are being, suddenly we have, racism as part of a general conversation. I mean, I think it's a very confrontative and difficult time. I would love to be back on the road again, and one day I'll do it. But I've just been busy with other stuff.